Story 1. Malcolm Rent Johnson was born on January 25, 1958. He was born in the United States. His parents were not married to each other for very long. When Malcolm was still a young boy, his mother and father divorced. After the divorce, Malcolm went to live with his father. His father lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So Malcolm grew up in Oklahoma City for the first part of his childhood. Malcolm's home life was not calm or happy. There were problems in the family. His father's house was not a stable place. Malcolm did not feel safe or settled there. As he got older, he started to think about leaving. He wanted to get away from his father's home. When Malcolm became an adolescent, which means a teenager, he made a decision. He decided to run away. He did not stay with his father. Instead, he went to find his mother. His mother had moved away after the divorce. She was living in Chicago, Illinois. So Malcolm left Oklahoma City and went to Chicago. He wanted to live with his mother. In Chicago, Malcolm got into trouble with the law. He was only 15 years old at that time. The police arrested him. The reason for the arrest was that he was carrying a gun. Carrying a gun at that age was against the law. This was the first time he was arrested, but it was not the last. For the next few years, Malcolm continued to break the law. When he was 19 years old, he committed more serious crimes. He robbed 2 women. He also raped those same 2 women. The police caught him. Malcolm decided to plead guilty. That means he told the court that he did those things. The court sentenced him to prison. He was sent to a state prison in Illinois. Malcolm stayed in prison for some time, but he did not serve his full sentence. He was released on parole. Parole means he was allowed to leave prison early, but he had to follow rules. One of the rules was that he could not commit new crimes. Another rule was that he had to stay in a certain place and report to a parole officer. In 1981, the parole officials in Illinois made a decision. They allowed Malcolm to move back to Oklahoma City. The reason was that he wanted to be near his family again. His family lived in Oklahoma City. So Malcolm left Illinois and went back to Oklahoma City. He was 23 years old. He was on parole. He was living in an apartment in Oklahoma City. Malcolm Rent Johnson had been living in Oklahoma City for about 5 months after moving back from Illinois. He was on parole, but he did not follow the rules of his parole. One of the rules was that he could not carry a gun. He broke that rule, but that was not the worst thing he did. On October 27, 1981, Johnson committed a violent crime against a woman named Ura Alma Thompson. She was 76 years old. She was a white woman. She lived alone in an apartment in Oklahoma City. Johnson did not know her before that day. He chose her because she was old and lived alone. He saw her as an easy target. Johnson went to Ura Thompson's apartment. He forced his way inside. Once he was inside, he attacked her. He hit her in the head and in the jaw. The blows were hard. They hurt her and made her weak. She could not fight back because she was old and he was much stronger. After beating her, Johnson forced her to have sex with him. The medical examiner later found clear evidence that the sexual intercourse was forced. It was not voluntary. Ura Thompson did not want this to happen. Johnson did not care. He used his strength to make her do what he wanted. While he was forcing her to have sex, Johnson put pressure on her chest. He also covered her mouth and her nose. He did this so she could not breathe. The pressure on her chest and the covering of her mouth and nose stopped air from going into her lungs. Ura Thompson could not call for help. She could not scream. She could not get air. After some time, she stopped breathing. She died from suffocation. That means her body ran out of oxygen because her airway was blocked. The medical examiner later said she was not strangled by hands around her neck. Instead, she died either because Johnson's weight on her chest stopped her from breathing, or because he held his hand over her mouth and nose, or both. Either way, Johnson caused her death. After Ura Thompson was dead, Johnson did not leave right away. He looked around her apartment. He saw many valuable things. He decided to take them. He took her furs. He took her typewriter. He took her watch. He took her key rings. He took her cigarette case. He took her hand mirror. He took her rings. He took her purse. He took other valuables as well. He gathered all these items and carried them out of her apartment. Johnson then went back to his own apartment. He brought all of Ura Thompson's belongings with him. He put them in his apartment. He did not tell anyone where he got these things. He did not report anything. He acted as if nothing had happened. Later that same day, people noticed that something was wrong. On the same day that Ura Alma Thompson was killed, her nephew Frank Thompson went to her apartment. He had a key or went to check on her. When he entered, he found her body on the floor. She was already dead. He called the police right away. The police arrived and saw that the woman had been beaten and that items were missing from her apartment. The police also called the medical examiner. The medical examiner performed an autopsy. He found evidence that Ura Thompson had been forced to have sex before she died. He also determined that she died from suffocation, not from strangulation. He wrote down all his findings in a report. While the police were investigating the murder scene, other officers went to Johnson's apartment on a different matter. Johnson was on parole from Illinois. His parole rules said he could not carry a gun. The police had received information that Johnson was carrying a handgun. So on October 27, 1981, the same day as the murder, police went to Johnson's apartment to arrest him for that weapons violation. When the police entered Johnson's apartment, they saw many items that looked valuable. They also saw a typewriter, furs, rings, watches, and other things. These items did not look like they belonged in Johnson's apartment. The officers remembered that a nearby murder victim had missing valuables. They connected the two things. They seized the items as evidence. The police then questioned Johnson. He denied knowing anything about the murder. He said he did not kill anyone. The police took hair, saliva, and blood samples from Johnson. They also collected semen samples from the victim's body and from the bed coverings in her apartment. A police chemist named Joyce Gilchrist tested these samples. She testified later that the semen found in the victim's apartment matched Johnson's blood type. She also said that several strands of hair found at the crime scene looked the same as Johnson's hair when viewed under a microscope. The police also found a key in Johnson's nightstand. That key opened Ura Thompson's apartment door. Johnson said that someone else gave him all the items and the key, but he did not say who. A neighbor of the victim also told police that he had seen Johnson near the crime scene around the time of the murder. Johnson was arrested for the murder of Ura Thompson. He went to trial in March 1982. He was 23 years old. The prosecution presented the physical evidence. The items from Thompson's apartment found in Johnson's home, the apartment key, the neighbor's testimony, and the forensic testimony from Joyce Gilchrist. The defense did not call any witnesses. Johnson did not take the stand in his own defense. The jury found Johnson guilty of murder. Then came the second part of the trial to decide if he would get the death penalty. The prosecution showed that Johnson had prior convictions. Before this murder, he had been convicted of 2 rapes in Illinois, 2 armed robberies, and 1 burglary. 4 women also testified that Johnson had raped or tried to rape them or robbed them with a gun, even though those crimes had not gone to court before. The defense called 16 of Johnson's relatives. They said he came from a broken and abusive home and that he was sick for 2 months as a toddler. But the jury decided that the bad things about Johnson outweighed the good things. On April 6, 1982, the jury sentenced him to death. Johnson spent almost 18 years on death row. He filed many appeals. He said he was innocent, but courts kept denying his appeals. In November 1999, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his last appeal. The state set his execution for January 6, 2000. On the night of his execution, Johnson was given a last meal. He asked for 3 fried chicken thighs, a dozen shrimp, tater tots with ketchup, 2 slices of pecan pie, strawberry ice cream, honey and biscuits, and a soda. He did not ask for clemency from the state board. He chose not to go before them. At 12:13 a.m. on January 6, 2000, Malcolm Rent Johnson was pronounced dead after receiving a lethal injection. His last words were, "I'm innocent, and I've got peace in my heart, and I'm ready to go home. I'm going to heaven on a midnight train. God bless my family." After Johnson was executed, problems came to light. The police chemist Joyce Gilchrist was later fired from the state lab. Other chemists re-examined the evidence from Johnson's case. In July 2000, a chemist named Laura Scheil looked at the microscope slides that Gilchrist had used. Scheil wrote a memo saying that the slides contained no sperm at all. 3 other chemists agreed. This meant that Gilchrist's testimony about semen matching Johnson's blood type may have been false. However, state officials said there was still enough other evidence to prove Johnson's guilt. The victims of Johnson's crimes, including the family of Ura Alma Thompson, had waited nearly 20 years for justice, and the state of Oklahoma carried out his sentence as the first execution in the United States in the year 2000. Story 2. David Ray Duran was born on August 28, 1962. He was a white male. His family was middle class. They lived in Alabama. When David was a child, his family lived in an apartment complex. Many of the other children in the complex lived with only one parent. Those parents had to work, so the children were often left alone with no adult watching them. David was a skinny boy. He was not strong. He was also a straight kid. That meant he did not do bad things. He did not curse. He did not smoke cigarettes. He did not drink alcohol. He did not smoke marijuana. But David wanted to have friends. He wanted to fit in with the other children. The other kids did curse. They did smoke. They did drink. They did use marijuana. At first, the other children did not accept David because he did not do those things. David made a choice. He decided that if he wanted to have real friends, he had to do what they did. So at age 12, David smoked his first cigarette. He drank his first beer. He smoked his first joint of marijuana. He also began to curse regularly. When David was 13 years old, he stopped attending church. He later said that this was a change in his life. It was not the cigarettes themselves that changed him. It was the attitude that led him to smoke when he knew it was wrong. As David got older, he started using more drugs. He did not stop at marijuana. He started crushing Quaaludes and mixing them with his pot. Then he used speed. Then he used cocaine. Then he used heroin 2 or 3 times a week. He also used LSD, which he called his favorite drug. He used LSD 4 or 5 times a week on average. David joined the Army. While he was in the Army, he continued using drugs, including LSD. He was discharged from the Army for smoking marijuana. At one point, David mixed heroin, methamphetamines, and alcohol together. His heart stopped. He had to be revived by CPR. That did not stop him from using drugs. David had an above-average IQ of 132. He was intelligent, but he continued making choices that put him in bad situations with bad people. He later said that peer pressure was his real problem growing up. He said that by giving in to peer pressure, he surrounded himself with so-called friends who drank, smoked, cursed, and did drugs. Those friends led him to drug dealers. The drug dealers did not sell only marijuana. They sold many kinds of drugs. David kept buying whatever was for sale. He kept using. He kept making choices that would later lead him to a much darker place. On October 20th, 1983, David Ray Duran was 21 years old. He had been using drugs heavily, including LSD on the night of the crime. He was with a 17-year-old accomplice named Richard Kinder. They were in the Birmingham area of Alabama. That evening, a 16-year-old girl named Kathleen Bedsole and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Charles Leonard, went on a date. They left Kathleen's home around 9 p.m. They planned to visit some haunted houses that local radio stations had set up for Halloween. Charles was driving his father's Oldsmobile. As Charles drove, he noticed a car behind him flashing its headlights. Charles thought it might be a friend of his, so he pulled his car over into a cul-de-sac and waited. A few minutes passed. Then another car entered the circle. That car backed out and then parked. Two men got out of that car. They were David Duran and Richard Kinder. Duran was carrying a pistol. The two men walked up to the Oldsmobile where Kathleen and Charles were sitting. Duran ordered the teenagers to get out of the car. He told them that if they did what they were told, they would be okay. Kinder was holding a knife. The teenagers had no choice. They got out. Duran and Kinder forced Kathleen and Charles into the trunk of the Oldsmobile. Then Duran and Kinder drove both cars to a nearby parking lot. They left their own car there. Both men then got into Charles's Oldsmobile, with the two teenagers still locked in the trunk. Duran drove. The car traveled a short distance and then stopped. Duran or Kinder opened one of the car doors. After a short time, the door closed and the car moved again. Then the car got onto an interstate highway. It traveled for a while. The car exited the interstate and soon pulled into a drive-in restaurant. From inside the trunk, Charles and Kathleen could hear a conversation between one of the men and a restaurant worker. They heard a worker shout the word robbery. Immediately after that, the car sped away. Duran drove back onto the interstate. He drove to a secluded area in Trussville, Alabama. There, he stopped the car. Duran and Kinder opened the trunk. They pulled Kathleen and Charles out. Kinder tied the two teenagers together with a length of rope. They were tied facing each other or side by side, bound together. Kinder then took Kathleen's purse. He opened it and removed two $20 bills. Kathleen's father had given her that money before she left home. That was the robbery. After taking the money, Kinder and Duran stepped away from the teenagers. They talked briefly. They decided that Duran would shoot Kathleen and Charles so there would be no witnesses. Kinder returned to the car. Duran walked toward the bound teenagers with the pistol in his hand. He stopped about 7 feet away from them. Duran raised the pistol. He aimed it. He squeezed the trigger. The gun fired. The bullet struck Kathleen Bedsole in the back of the head. She collapsed immediately. Because she was tied to Charles, she pulled him down with her. She fell on top of him or beside him, but they were still tied together. Kathleen was not killed instantly. The small caliber bullet entered the base of her skull. It penetrated her brain. According to later testimony, the wound paralyzed her from the neck down. She could not move. She could not breathe properly. She would later die from asphyxiation. After Kathleen fell, Duran lowered the gun. He pointed it at Charles Leonard. He fired about 4 more times. 3 of those bullets hit Charles. 1 struck him in the chest. 2 struck him in his legs and hips. Duran stopped shooting. He believed both teenagers were dead. He walked back to the car. He got in with Kinder. Duran drove away. Charles Leonard was still alive. He had 3 bullet wounds in his body, but he was conscious. He managed to work himself free from the rope that tied him to Kathleen's body. He got loose. Despite his injuries, Charles walked to a nearby home. He knocked on the door. Mr. and Mrs. Doser lived there. They saw Charles was hurt. They called the sheriff's office for help. At that point, David Duran and Richard Kinder were driving away in Charles's car. They did not know that Charles had survived. They did not know that help had been called. They simply drove off, leaving Kathleen's body behind and Charles wounded but alive. The sheriff's deputies received the call from Mr. and Mrs. Doser's home. They sent officers to the scene. Charles Leonard was still there, wounded but alive. He told the deputies what had happened. He described the 2 men who attacked them. He gave a description of the car and the men. A radio transmission was sent out to other deputies in the area. One deputy received that transmission. Shortly afterward, that deputy saw two men walking along a public road in the Roebuck and Huffman area of Birmingham. The men matched the descriptions Charles had given. The deputy stopped them. Their appearance was disheveled and suspicious. The deputy took them into custody. The two men were David Ray Duren and Richard Kinder. They were arrested within a few hours of the shooting. Detective Sergeant M.E. White questioned the two men. Duren made a statement admitting his participation in the crime. He confessed not once but twice. After confessing, Duren led the officers back to the crime scene in Trussville. He showed them exactly where the shooting happened. He also pointed out where he had hidden the murder weapon. Officers recovered the pistol. Charles Leonard was taken to a hospital. He was treated for his 3 bullet wounds. He survived. Later that same evening, Charles was shown a group of people. He identified Duren as the man who had shot him and Kathleen Bedsole. Charles also testified later about everything he saw and heard that night. Kathleen Bedsole's body was found at the scene. Dr. Robert Brissy, a forensic pathologist, examined her. He determined the cause of death. She died from a small-caliber gunshot wound to the back of the head. The bullet penetrated her brain. She was paralyzed from the neck down and died from asphyxiation. Her death was ruled a homicide. The case went to trial in Jefferson County, Alabama, on March 7, 1984. The jury heard the evidence. They heard Charles Leonard's testimony. They heard that Duren had confessed twice. They heard that Duren led police to the gun. The facts were undisputed except for one small point about whether Kathleen was facing Duren when he shot her. Duren was convicted of capital murder. The charge was intentionally killing someone while committing a robbery and kidnapping. The jury returned a verdict fixing the punishment at death. Before the sentence was formally imposed, the judge in the case, Judge Joseph Jasper, learned that his deceased wife was a 5th cousin of David Duren. Judge Jasper stepped aside from the case. The case was transferred to Judge James Garrett. On September 14, 1984, Judge Garrett held a sentencing hearing. He reviewed the trial transcript. He allowed Duren to present witnesses. Duren called the same witnesses he had used at trial plus 2 new ones. After considering everything, Judge Garrett found that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating ones. He sentenced David Ray Duren to death. Richard Kinder, the accomplice, was not sentenced to death. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. While on death row, Duren became a born-again Christian. He was baptized in 1986. He wrote articles and letters warning young people about drugs and peer pressure. He wrote an autobiography called An Attitude Adjustment. In it, he admitted his crime and expressed shame and sorrow. Duren's lawyers filed appeals. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction in 1986. A post-conviction relief petition was denied in 1990. A federal habeas corpus appeal went to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which ruled against Duren in 1998. The United States Supreme Court refused to hear his case in December 1999. With all appeals exhausted, the Alabama Supreme Court set an execution date of January 7, 2000. Duren opposed any last-minute appeals to avoid the electric chair. He said the death penalty was appropriate because he was guilty. He said he did not want to drag out the process and be unfair to the victim's family. On January 7, 2000, at 12:01 a.m., David Ray Duren was executed in the electric chair at Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama. He was 37 years old. He declined to make a final statement. He was pronounced dead at 12:09 a.m. Kathleen Bedsole's uncle and cousin witnessed the execution, along with 2 of Duren's friends. Charles Leonard, who survived and later became a Baptist minister in South Carolina, said there was no joy in the execution, but that justice had to be done. The case of David Ray Duran ended with his death in the electric chair, while Kathleen Bedsole remained dead at 16 years old, and Charles Leonard carried the scars of that night for the rest of his life. Story 3. Douglas Christopher Thomas was born on May 29, 1973. His father was Robert Christopher Thomas. His mother was Margaret Marshall Thomas. His father came to the hospital on the day Douglas was born. After that day, his father left and did not see Douglas again for many years. Douglas grew up without his father in his life. When Douglas was 2 years old, his mother gave him away. She could not take care of him. She left him to be raised by her parents. These were Douglas's maternal grandparents. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Herbert Marshall. Douglas went to live with his grandparents in Middlesex County, Virginia. He also became very close to his uncle, Winfred Childress. His uncle lived in Middlesex County as well. Douglas felt safe and loved with his grandparents and his uncle. For the first 12 years of his life, people who knew him said he was a happy child. He did well. He was well adjusted. Then the year 1985 came. Douglas was 12 years old. That summer, his uncle Winfred died suddenly in an accident at work. Douglas was heartbroken. He felt abandoned. His grandparents were old and could not fill the place that his uncle had held in his heart. In August of that same year, Douglas's grandmother died. She was the woman who had raised him as his mother. Now she was gone. Douglas was left with only his elderly grandfather. Then, just a few months later in December, his grandfather died as well. In less than 6 months, Douglas had lost his uncle and both of his grandparents. The only family he had ever truly known was gone. After his grandfather died, there was no one left to take care of Douglas. He was forced to leave Middlesex County. He went to live with his biological mother in Chesterfield County, Virginia. His mother had not raised him. He did not know her well. Living with her was very hard for him. His mother was living with her lesbian partner. That partner had 2 teenage children who also lived in the house. The house was crowded. His mother and her partner were having serious problems in their relationship. There was tension and stress in the home every day. As soon as Douglas moved into this house, his behavior changed. He had never had serious problems before. Now he started missing school. His grades fell. He began to commit petty crimes. He also started using drugs, including marijuana and LSD. He used alcohol as well. The problems at school became so bad that the school officials decided Douglas needed to be placed in a special class. This class was for emotionally disturbed students. His problems were now serious enough that trained professionals had to help him. In the middle of 1989, things got worse. Douglas became so depressed and anxious that he tried to kill himself. He did not succeed. Doctors said he needed psychiatric treatment. He was sent to a hospital. After the hospital, he was placed in a learning center in Hanover County for several weeks. The doctors there said he had depression. They said he had unresolved grief from the deaths of his grandparents and his uncle. In early 1990, his counselors came up with a plan. They thought Douglas would do better if he returned to Middlesex County. That was where he had been happy with his grandparents. They arranged for him to live with his aunt and uncle. His aunt was Brenda Marshall. His uncle was Herbert Marshall. They were not the same grandparents who had died. These were different relatives. But the plan did not work well. There was constant conflict in the Marshall home. Herbert Marshall often threatened to send Douglas back to Chesterfield County to live with his mother again. Douglas was terrified of that. He did not want to go back to his mother's house. He felt desperate. In 1990, Douglas learned that his mother was on her way from Chesterfield to Middlesex to pick him up. He did not want to be sent back, so he ran away. He fled to North Carolina with several other teenagers. They stole a car to make the trip. After he came back from North Carolina, something changed. In the summer of 1990, Douglas met a girl. Her name was Jessica Wiseman. She was 14 years old. Douglas was 17. They began a relationship. It was intense. It was both emotional and sexual. Jessica was the one who controlled the relationship. She was mature for her age. She made the decisions. Douglas had been starved for love and attention his whole life. His mother had given him away. His father was absent. His grandparents and uncle had died. He was desperate for someone to care about him. Jessica showed him love. She gave him the attention he had always wanted. Because he needed that love so badly, Douglas was willing to do almost anything to keep her. Douglas kept seeing Jessica. Her parents did not approve of their relationship. Jessica's father was James Baxter Wiseman. Everyone called him JB. Her mother was Kathy Wiseman. They were both 33 years old. They pressured Jessica to stop seeing Douglas. They wanted the relationship to end. Jessica did not want to end it. She became angry at her parents. About 3 months before the murders, someone heard Jessica say that she wished to get rid of her parents. She wanted them gone from her life. Jessica's father began making threats. He told Douglas that if he did not stay away from Jessica, Mr. Wiseman would kill him. This made Douglas afraid, but he still did not want to lose Jessica. Jessica came up with a plan. She told Douglas that they should kill her parents. That way, nothing would stand between them. They could be together. Douglas did not want to do this at first. But Jessica kept pushing him. She insisted. She was the one who wanted her parents dead. She was the one who convinced Douglas to carry out the killing. They talked about the plan several times. On a Tuesday, about 4 days before the murders, a girl named Lainey Creech overheard them. Lainey was 12 years old. She lived in the same house as Douglas. She heard Douglas and Jessica talking about getting rid of her parents. Jessica asked Douglas if he had enough bullets. He said yes. Jessica asked him what time he should come over. He said midnight. Jessica told him that if her window was down, he should go away. That meant the plan was off. But if the window was up, he should come in. On Thursday evening, Lainey talked to Douglas. She asked him why he was so nervous. He told her that he had to kill 2 people. He said he was very nervous about it. On Friday evening, just before midnight, Lainey saw Douglas putting on camouflage clothing. She also saw that he had a shotgun. He told Lainey the plan. After the shootings were done, he would return home. He would go in through his own window and pretend to be sleeping. Then Jessica would come to the door and bang on it loudly. Douglas and Lainey left the house together. They walked to a nearby recreation area. There, Douglas smoked some marijuana. He told Lainey he was going over to Jessica's house to kill 2 people. Lainey carried the shotgun for a while as they walked. They got to a point a few hundred feet away from Jessica's house. Then Lainey turned around and went back home. Douglas went to the Wiseman house. It was late at night on November 10th, 1990. The house was in Piankatank Shores in Middlesex County. Jessica helped him get inside. She opened a window. Douglas climbed through. Jessica closed the window behind him. Once Douglas was inside, they staged the scene. They took some drugs and arranged them on the floor. They did this to make it look like someone had broken in to rob the house. They wanted the police to think the murders were part of a robbery attempt. Douglas started to have doubts. He did not want to go through with it, but Jessica insisted. She told him it had to be done. So Douglas walked down the hall to the bedroom where Jessica's parents were sleeping. He raised the shotgun. He shot J.B. Wiseman first. The shot killed him immediately. He was still in his bed. Then Douglas shot Kathy Wiseman. She was also in the bed, but the first shot did not kill her right away. She was wounded but still alive. Kathy Wiseman got up from the bed. She went into the hallway. Jessica was there. Douglas was there too. Kathy was still alive, but she was hurt badly. Jessica looked at Douglas and told him to shoot again. She demanded that he finish it. Douglas fired the shotgun a second time at Kathy Wiseman. This time, she died instantly. After the killings, Douglas followed the plan. He went back home. He went in through his window. He got into his bed and pretended to be asleep. Then Jessica went to the Marshall house. She banged loudly on the door. Laney opened the door. Jessica ran straight to Brenda Marshall's bedroom. She was screaming. She said that someone had shot her father and that her mother was dead. Brenda Marshall told Douglas to get dressed and comfort Jessica while she called the police. A deputy sheriff named Don F. Rhea was sent to the Wiseman home. He arrived at 4:27 in the morning. He went in through the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, he found the bodies of J.B. and Kathy Wiseman. J.B. was in the bed. Kathy was in the hallway. Later that day, a state police officer named Special Agent Larry A. Johnson came to the Marshall house. He interviewed Douglas 2 times. During the second interview, Douglas confessed. He told the officer that he had killed both Mr. and Mrs. Wiseman with the shotgun. At the time of his confession, Douglas had only slept 2 hours in the past 40 hours. He was still feeling the effects of the marijuana he had smoked. He was 17 years old. No parent was present during the questioning. No lawyer was there to advise him. But he signed the confession anyway. Jessica was also questioned. She was 14 years old. Because of her age, she was handled differently under Virginia law. She was not charged as an adult. She was processed through the juvenile court system. After Douglas confessed to the police, he was arrested. He was taken into custody. The case went to juvenile court first because he was 17. On January 23, 1991, Douglas appeared in juvenile court. He was charged with first-degree murder for killing J.B. Wiseman. He was also charged with capital murder for killing Kathy Wiseman as part of the same act. 2 additional charges were filed for using a firearm in each killing. Douglas made a decision. He waived his right to a preliminary hearing. He also waived his right to a transfer hearing. This meant the case would move automatically from juvenile court to circuit court. On January 28, 1991, a grand jury indicted Douglas on all 4 charges. The trial was first set for May 29, 1991. It was later moved to August 21, 1991. On that day, Douglas went to court. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder of J.B. Wiseman. He also pleaded guilty to using a firearm in that killing. He pleaded not guilty to capital murder of Kathy Wiseman and not guilty to using a firearm in her killing. The trial was held in Middlesex County. Douglas's lawyers asked to move the trial to a different location. They said there was too much news about the case in the local area. They hired a doctor to do a survey. The doctor found that between 96.3% and 99.3% of people in Middlesex County recognized the case. About 38.7% of people surveyed said Douglas was guilty. Only 1.4% said he was innocent. The rest said no opinion. The doctor believed many of those with no opinion were still influenced by the news. The prosecution presented its own evidence against moving the trial. The judge agreed with the prosecution. The trial stayed in Middlesex County. During the first phase of the trial, the jury heard the evidence. They convicted Douglas of capital murder for killing Kathy Wiseman. They also convicted him of using a firearm in her killing. They set the punishment for the firearm charge at 4 years in prison. Then the second phase began. The jury had to decide whether Douglas would receive death or life in prison. The prosecution argued that the killing was vile. That was one of the legal reasons to give death. The defense brought a psychologist named Dr. Earl Williams. He said Douglas was developmentally immature. He said Douglas had below average intelligence. He said Douglas was easily influenced by Jessica because of these problems. The prosecution's own psychologist, Dr. Henry Gwaltney, also said the evidence did not justify a death sentence. But the jury disagreed. They found that the vileness factor applied. They fixed Douglas's punishment at death. The trial court held a sentencing hearing after receiving a report from a probation officer. The judge upheld the jury's death sentence for the murder of Kathy Wiseman. For the first-degree murder of J.B. Wiseman, the judge sentenced Douglas to 65 years in prison. For the firearm charge related to that killing, he received 2 more years. The total sentence was death plus 67 years. The date was August 21, 1991, but the formal sentencing happened on November 22, 1991. That was the day Douglas was officially sent to death row. Jessica Wiseman was tried separately. Because she was only 14, she stayed in juvenile court. On June 26, 1991, she was convicted of both murders. The maximum punishment allowed at that time for a juvenile was custody until age 21. Jessica was born on July 26, 1976. She was released from state custody on July 26, 1997. She was free to resume her normal life. Douglas appealed his case. He argued that his confession should not have been used. He said it was forced. He said he was 17, a high school dropout, sleep-deprived, and surrounded by officers who wanted him to confess. He also said he was still affected by marijuana. The Virginia Supreme Court rejected his appeal in 1992. He filed more appeals in state and federal court. All were denied. In 1999, a federal court of appeals reviewed his case. The 3 judges noted that Douglas murdered the Wisemans at the request of their daughter Jessica, but they upheld the death sentence. Douglas also tried to argue that an international treaty should stop his execution. The United States had signed a treaty that said no one under 18 should be executed, but the Senate had added an exception when they ratified it. The U.S. Supreme Court was asked to review this issue. They turned down the appeal on the day of the execution. Douglas's lawyers asked the governor of Virginia, James Gilmore, for clemency. They said it was unfair that Jessica was free while Douglas faced death. They said no one involved in the case believed execution was right. This included the trial judge, the prosecutors, and the state's own mental health expert. The governor denied clemency. He said Douglas's responsibility was not reduced just because Jessica had legal protections due to her age. On January 10, 2000, Douglas Christopher Thomas was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. He was 26 years old. He had spent more than 8 years on death row. He made no final statement. He was pronounced dead at 9:03 p.m. Jessica Wiseman was not charged again. The law in Virginia was later changed to allow 14-year-olds to be tried as adults, but that change did not apply to her. She went on with her life. Douglas's father, who had never seen his son after the day he was born, visited him once on death row in 1996. Douglas earned his GED while in prison and tried to rebuild relationships with his family. The story of Douglas Christopher Thomas ended on that January night in 2000, when the state of Virginia carried out his death sentence for a crime he committed at 17 years old. Story 4. Earl Carl Heiselbetz Jr. was born on April 1, 1951, in the state of Texas. His parents were Earl Heiselbetz Sr. and Anna Heiselbetz. He grew up in a normal home with his mother and father. There is no public record of major problems in his very early childhood. Earl went to school like other children. However, he did not finish high school. He dropped out before earning his diploma. After leaving school, he worked at different jobs. For a time, he worked as a truck driver. Later in his life, he became unemployed. He did not have a steady job at the time of the events that would come later. Earl married a woman named Becky. They had 2 children together. For a period of time, they lived as a family. But the marriage was not happy. Earl showed a violent side to his wife and children. His ex-wife later testified in court about his behavior. She said that Earl physically abused their 2 children. He would hit them, sometimes on the head. The children needed professional psychiatric help because of the abuse. Eventually, Earl lost his parental rights over the children. That meant he was no longer legally allowed to raise them or make decisions for them. The violence was not only toward his children. His ex-wife also said that after she and Earl separated, he broke into her house and raped her. This was a serious crime, but it happened before the events that would come later in his life. Another relative, his former sister-in-law, also saw Earl beat his 2 children with the buckle end of a leather belt. That is a heavy metal part of a belt, and hitting with it causes more pain and injury than the strap. Earl also showed violent anger toward other people. A 72-year-old woman later testified about an incident with Earl. She had hired him to do work on her roof. She fired him because he did a poor job. Earl became violently angry. He chased her with a hammer and threatened to kill her. This happened about 2 years before the events that would later put him on death row. In 1975, Earl was in a serious car accident. He suffered head injuries from that crash. After the accident, he sometimes claimed that he had blackouts. A blackout means a period of time when a person cannot remember what happened. He said these blackouts happened occasionally. Later, a psychiatrist would examine him and give an opinion about whether the head injury could really cause the kind of blackouts Earl described. Earl had a habit that was unusual. He liked to participate in sweepstakes contests. Sweepstakes are promotions where people can win prizes. Some of these contests required calling a special telephone number that started with 900. Those calls cost money. Earl wanted to make these 900 calls, but his wife Becky did not like it. She discouraged him because the calls were expensive. Despite this, Earl remained interested in calling those numbers to enter sweepstakes. Earl was a large man. He weighed about 250 pounds at the time of the events that would come later. He was 6 feet and 2 inches tall. People who knew him described him as a kind of loner. He did not have many friends. He kept to himself. He lived in a secluded area near the Sabine National Forest in East Texas. His home was far from the road and not easily seen by others. That is where Earl Carl Heiselbetz Jr. was living in the early 1990s. He was unemployed. He had a history of violence against his family and others. He had been in a car accident in 1975 that he said caused blackouts. He liked to make expensive 900 number calls for sweepstakes. He was a large, strong man who mostly stayed alone. His life up to that point had been marked by dropped out of school, failed marriage, abuse of his children, and a rape of his ex-wife. But none of that had led to an arrest or prison time for the worst of his actions. He remained free, living in his home near the forest. Earl Carl Heiselbetz Jr. lived 2/10 of a mile away from the Rogers family. The Rogers home was secluded and could not be seen from the road. Before the Rogers even moved into that house, Heiselbetz had broken into it while it was locked. After breaking in, he bragged that he could get into the house whenever he wanted to. The Rogers family was made up of Bob Rogers, his wife Rena, and their 2-year-old daughter Jacy. Rena was a very small woman. She was less than 5 feet tall and weighed no more than 90 pounds. Jacy was a toddler. On Friday, May 24, 1991, the Rogers family left their home to go out of town for the Memorial Day weekend. They left their 2 watchdogs outside to guard the property. They were gone for several days. On Tuesday, May 28, 1991, Rena drove Bob to his job in Lufkin. She dropped him off between 10:30 and 11 o'clock in the morning. Then she went home. When Bob came home from work that evening, he discovered that the 2 dogs were missing. That same Tuesday morning, at 10:01 and 10:02 a.m., someone used the Rogers home telephone to call a sweepstakes company called MultiQuest. The number was a 900 number, which charges money to the phone bill. The Rogers were not home at those times. Nobody had permission to be in their home. Heiselbetz liked to enter sweepstakes by calling 900 numbers. His wife had told him not to because it cost too much. On that same Tuesday, Heiselbetz told his wife that a dog had bitten him that morning. When she saw him later, he had a bite on his finger and scratches on his arms. He was very upset. On June 2nd, 1991, someone found the body of one of the missing dogs. It had been shot. The body was found in the area near the Rogers home and Heiselbetz's home. Now the story moves to Thursday, May 30th, 1991. That morning at about 9:30, a neighbor saw Rena and JC at a grocery store. Rena had plans to meet her sister-in-law, Natalie Witten, at 11:30 that morning. They were going to drive together to Nacogdoches. Rena would bring JC with her. Natalie confirmed the plans over the telephone that morning. At around 11 a.m., Heiselbetz killed Rena and JC. He later confessed that he killed them at that time. He said he did not remember exactly how he killed them because he blacked out. But he did remember seeing marks on their necks. The medical evidence later showed that Rena had a condition called pink tooth in her skeletal remains. That condition happens in people who die from asphyxiation, which means being unable to breathe. Strangulation was given as a possible cause of death for Rena. For JC, the skeletal remains did not show a clear cause of death because the child's bones were incomplete. After killing them, Heiselbetz put both bodies into Rena's car. He drove the car several miles away to a barn in nearby Tyler County. He left the bodies there. Then he drove Rena's car back to her house and parked it in her driveway. He went inside the Rogers home and took a package of frozen hamburger meat and a can of tomato sauce. He took those items to his own home. From the Rogers home, Heiselbetz also took Rena's purse, her car keys, and a jar of coins. He later tried to burn the purse and the items inside it. He threw the purse into a pond. He also got rid of the jar of coins in the same pond. Rena never showed up to meet her sister-in-law at 11:30 that morning. When Natalie waited and Rena did not come, something was clearly wrong. At the Rogers home, there was no sign of a fight or struggle. But Rena's purse, keys, and the jar of coins were missing. Her car was in the driveway. Rena and JC were gone. Almost a month passed. On June 27th, 1991, someone found human skeletal remains in and around a barn in Tyler County. The remains were of an adult woman and a small child. Dentists and doctors used dental records and medical records to identify them. They were Rena Rogers and her daughter JC. That same day, law enforcement officers questioned Heiselbetz again. He had already been questioned once before, on the day Rena and JC disappeared. On that first day, his answers about where he had been were questionable. That made him a potential suspect. Now, on June 27th, with the bodies found, he was questioned again. This time, he confessed to the murders. He gave his confession in the presence of his wife at a relative's home. Later, he signed a written confession. In his confession, Heiselbetz said that Rena Rogers had come to his gate on the morning of May 30th with JC. He said she was angry and accused him of shooting her dogs. He said he turned to walk away, then felt pain in his leg and realized he had been shot. He said he went into his house to take care of his leg. When he came back out after some time, Rena was still there. He said she threw something at him. He ducked, hit his head on a fence post, and blacked out. When he woke up, both Rena and JC were dead. He said he guessed that he had killed them, but the evidence did not match this story. The holes in the jeans he wore that day were not caused by bullets. A doctor looked at the marks on his leg and said they did not look like a gunshot wound. The marks appeared to be a year or two old, not new. A few days after his confession, Heiselbetz led officers to the pond where he had thrown Rena's purse. He showed them the route he had taken after the killings. Officers recovered the purse from the pond. Rena's identification was still inside it. Heiselbetz was asked directly if he had strangled the victims. He said he did not think so, but he remembered marks on their necks. A court-appointed psychiatrist later examined him. The psychiatrist said there was nothing in the examination that would explain or excuse what Heiselbetz had done. The psychiatrist also said that the head injury from the 1975 car accident could not have caused the amnesia that Heiselbetz claimed. After Heiselbetz confessed on June 27, 1991, and led officers to the pond where Rena's purse was recovered, the investigation moved forward. The police already had Heiselbetz as a suspect from the very day Rena and JC disappeared. On that day, May 30th, 1991, a Sabine County sheriff had questioned Heiselbetz about his whereabouts. His answers did not sound truthful. That made the sheriff pay closer attention to him. After the bodies were found on June 27th, the police questioned Heiselbetz again. He confessed voluntarily. But before that confession, Heiselbetz had been given 3 lie detector tests. He failed all 3. That means the machine showed he was not telling the truth when he answered questions. Failing those tests added to the police's belief that he was guilty. The police also gathered physical evidence. The assistant director of the Jefferson County Regional Crime Lab examined the blue jeans Heiselbetz wore on the day of the murders. The jeans had holes in them. Heiselbetz had claimed that Rena shot him in the leg, but the lab found no evidence that the holes were caused by bullets. A doctor also examined the marks on Heiselbetz's leg. The doctor said the injury did not look like a gunshot wound. It looked like an old scar, maybe 1 or 2 years old, not a fresh wound from May 30th. The forensic anthropologist who examined Rena's skeletal remains found the pink tooth condition. That is a change in tooth color that happens when a person dies from asphyxiation, such as strangulation. This matched Heiselbetz's own memory of seeing marks on the victims' necks. Even though he said he blacked out, the physical evidence pointed clearly to strangulation. A court-appointed psychiatrist examined Heiselbetz. The psychiatrist found nothing in the examination that would explain or excuse the killings. He also said the head injury from the 1975 car accident could not have caused the kind of amnesia Heiselbetz claimed. So the claim of blacking out was not accepted as true. On July 16, 1991, a grand jury charged Heiselbetz with capital murder. Capital murder in Texas means killing more than one person during the same criminal event. That crime can be punished by death. Heiselbetz was arrested and held in jail. The trial took place in Sabine County, Texas. Heiselbetz pleaded not guilty. The jury heard all the evidence. The confession, the missing person coins, the 900 number calls made from the Rogers home while they were away, the dead dog that had been shot, the bite marks on Heiselbetz's hand, the lack of any real gunshot wound, and the testimony from his ex-wife and others about his violent past. The jury also heard that Rena was a very small woman, under 5 feet tall and only 90 pounds, while Heiselbetz was 250 pounds and much stronger. On November 18, 1991, the jury found Earl Carl Heiselbetz Jr. guilty of capital murder. Then came the punishment phase. The jury had to decide whether he would get life in prison or the death penalty. They answered 2 special questions required by Texas law. Their answers led to a death sentence. On November 20, 1991, the trial judge formally sentenced Heiselbetz to death. After the sentence, Heiselbetz's lawyers began appeals. Under Texas law, the death sentence was automatically appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. That court reviewed the case and affirmed, or upheld, the conviction and sentence on June 28, 1995. Heiselbetz did not ask the United States Supreme Court to review that decision at that time. On April 24, 1997, Heiselbetz filed a state habeas corpus application. That is a legal request asking the court to review whether his imprisonment was illegal. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied that application on January 21, 1998. Heiselbetz then filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Texas on February 5, 1998. The district court denied relief on October 20, 1998. It also denied him permission to appeal. The United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit also denied permission to appeal on July 26, 1999. Heiselbetz then filed a petition with the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not grant the petition, which meant the death sentence would stand. On January 12, 2000, the date of execution arrived. Heiselbetz was 48 years old. He was taken to the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was strapped to a gurney. Through a window, he saw his mother and father watching. He said to them, "Love y'all. See you on the other side." His mother waved and said, "Love you. Love you." Then the lethal injection drugs were given. He coughed twice and gasped 3 times. At 6:19 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was the 200th person executed in Texas since the state resumed capital punishment in 1982. After the execution, Heiselbetz's body was released to his family. The victims, Rena and J.C. Rogers, had already been laid to rest after their remains were identified. Bob Rogers, the husband and father, was left to live with the loss of his wife and 2-year-old daughter. The case was closed, and the man who took their lives was put to death by the state of Texas. Story 5. Gary Allen Walker was born on September 25, 1953. He was also known by another name, Gary Allen Edwards. His early life was not happy or normal. From a very young age, he suffered inside his own home. His mother married a man who became Gary's stepfather. This stepfather was a cruel and violent person. He beat Gary many times. The beatings were not small punishments. They were serious and painful attacks. On one occasion, the stepfather threatened Gary with a rifle. Gary lived in fear of this man. The problems did not come only from the stepfather. Gary's mother also caused him harm. She had many different men come into the household. When Gary was between 10 and 12 years old, his mother did something very wrong. She had sexual relations with him. She also had sexual relations with his friends. This abuse happened inside the home, where Gary should have been safe. Because of this terrible home life, Gary struggled in school. He could not focus on his lessons. His mind was filled with pain and confusion. When he was 13 years old, the school or his family sent him to a place called Children's Medical Hospital. He stayed there for 3 months. During that time, doctors examined him carefully. They gave him a diagnosis. They said he had a personality disorder. They also said he had poor control over his impulses and his emotions. This meant he could not stop himself from acting on sudden feelings or thoughts. The hospital doctors made a recommendation. They said Gary should be placed outside his home. They believed he needed to live somewhere else, away from his mother and stepfather. But Gary's parents refused. They said no. So Gary went back to the same house where the abuse continued. When Gary was 14 years old, he committed his first offense in the juvenile justice system. He stole a car. He was convicted of car theft. This was the first time the law caught up with him. But it would not be the last. As Gary grew older, his mental health got worse. By the time he was 19 years old, he was hospitalized at a place called Eastern State Mental Hospital. This was a hospital for people with serious mental illnesses. While he was there, doctors gave him a new diagnosis. They said he had a severe schizophrenic type disorder. Schizophrenia is a mental condition where a person may see or hear things that are not real, or believe things that are not true. Gary did not get better quickly. He would go back to Eastern State Mental Hospital 8 more times after that first visit. Over these years, doctors tried many treatments. They gave him antipsychotic medications. These are strong drugs meant to control hallucinations and strange beliefs. They also gave him electroconvulsive shock treatments. This is a procedure where doctors send small electric currents through the brain to change how it works. Later, doctors also said Gary had bipolar disorder. This is a condition where a person's mood swings between very high and very low. For this, they treated him with a drug called lithium. Despite all these hospital stays and treatments, Gary never had a stable or peaceful life. He moved between mental hospitals and trouble with the law. His childhood was filled with abuse from both his stepfather and his mother. His teenage years were filled with mental health crises and his first criminal acts. By the time he became a young adult, he had already spent many years inside hospitals and juvenile facilities. He had been diagnosed with serious mental disorders. He had been given strong medications and shock treatments. But nothing had fixed the damage that started when he was a small child. Gary Allen Walker was 30 years old when the crimes began. He had spent many years moving between prisons and mental hospitals. On February 7, 1984, he was given parole. He was released back into society. He did not stay out of trouble for long. The first crime happened on May 7, 1984. Walker was hitchhiking in a town called Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. A man named Eddie O. Cash stopped his car. Eddie was 63 years old. He saw Walker on the side of the road. The day was hot, and Eddie wanted to help. He offered Walker a ride to a town called Owasso. Walker got into the car. During the car ride, Eddie and Walker talked. Eddie mentioned that he lived in Broken Arrow. He did not know that this information was dangerous to share. Walker listened carefully and remembered what Eddie said. After Eddie dropped Walker off, Walker decided to do something bad. He wanted to go into Eddie's home and steal things. Walker called Directory Assistance, which was a phone service that gave out people's addresses. He got Eddie's home address from this service. Then Walker went to Eddie's house. When Walker arrived at the house, he knocked on the front door. He wanted to make sure no one was home before he broke in. But while he was knocking, Eddie pulled into his own driveway in his car. Eddie had come back home. Walker saw Eddie and ran away. He was afraid Eddie would call the police. But Walker did not leave for good. He found a brick near the side of the house. He picked up the brick. Then he went back to the front door and knocked again. Eddie opened the door. When Eddie opened the door, Walker struck him in the head with the brick. He hit him many times. Then Walker found a vacuum cleaner cord inside the house. He wrapped the cord around Eddie's neck and strangled him. Eddie died from the attack. Walker then stole several items from Eddie's home, including Eddie's van and his shoes. That same day, May 7, 1984, Walker found his second victim. Her name was Margaret and Bell Leidick. She was 37 years old. Walker encountered her in a town called Poteau, Oklahoma. He kidnapped her. He took her from Oklahoma all the way to Kentucky. During this time, he raped her. He also tortured her. He did these things many times over the hours or days of the trip. Then he killed her. He left her naked body in Princeton, Kentucky. Her body was not found until June 8, 1984, more than a month later. 1 week passed. On May 14, 1984, Walker killed his third victim. Her name was Jane K. Hilburn. She was 35 years old. She worked as a grocery store clerk. She lived in Veneta, Oklahoma. Near her house, Walker attacked her. He strangled her until she died. After she was dead, he stole her car. The car was a black Camaro. He drove away in it. Jane's daughter found her mother's body on that same day, May 14th. Walker kept moving. On May 15, 1984, the day after Jane Hilburn was killed, Walker approached another woman. This woman was 18 years old. She was from a place called Oakhurst. Walker was driving the black Camaro he had stolen from Jane. He pulled up next to the woman and offered her a ride. She accepted. Once she was inside the car, Walker introduced himself as Gary Edwards. He asked her if she wanted to be a model. The woman became nervous. She asked to be let out of the car. Walker pulled out a knife instead. He told her to do what he said if she wanted to live. He drove her to a place called the Keystone Ramp. He ordered her to take off all her clothes. But before he could rape her, she jumped out of the car and ran to the road. She flagged down help and escaped. Walker did not kill her, but he tried. 5 days later, on May 20th, 1984, Walker picked up two hitchhikers. One was a young boy. The other was a 17-year-old girl. They were in a town called Hominy, Oklahoma. Walker made the boy get out of the car far from civilization. The boy was left behind. Walker kept the girl. He drove her toward a town called Skiatook. He warned her to cooperate or he would kill her. He took her to a secluded spot on an oil property. He forced her to take off her bra and underwear. Then he raped her many times at knife point. He also forced her to perform oral sex. At some point, Walker fell asleep. The girl escaped from the car and ran to the highway. A truck driver stopped and helped her. She survived and went to the sheriff's office to report what happened. Walker realized that the black Camaro he was driving was now known to the police. The girl who escaped would describe the car. So Walker abandoned the Camaro in an oil field. He left it there on May 22nd, 1984. The next day, May 23rd, 1984, Walker was walking down a street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He saw a woman looking under the hood of her car. The car was a Dodge Dart. The woman was trying to fix it or figure out why it would not start. Walker approached her and offered to help. He quickly saw that the car was out of gas. He went to get a can of gas and brought it back. The woman was grateful. She told him her name was Janet D. Jewell. She was 32 years old. She lived in Beggs, Oklahoma. She had 3 children. She was divorced. She was looking for a job in Tulsa. Her boyfriend was watching her children at his apartment while she searched for work. Walker put the gas in the car. He told Janet to start the engine. When she did, he climbed into the driver's seat next to her. He pulled out a long-bladed knife. He kidnapped her in broad daylight in downtown Tulsa. He forced her to drive to different places. He made her stop at a store to buy potato chips and drinks with her own money. Then he drove her to a remote area. He tied her hands with a cord. He raped her several times. He kept her overnight. At one point, an oil pumper saw them. Both Walker and Janet were naked and passed out in the car. The oil pumper told them to leave because it was private property. He did not see that Janet's hands were tied. Walker and Janet left. On the morning of May 24th, Walker raped and sodomized Janet many more times. Janet pleaded with him. She said, "I will do whatever you want, only do not kill me for the sake of my 3 children." Walker did not listen. He took a piece of cord and wrapped it around her neck. He strangled her until she died. Then he drove to a dirt road near a small creek about 2 miles east of Beggs, Oklahoma. He threw her body into the creek. He sat and ate the remaining potato chips as he watched her body sink into the water. Later that same day, May 24th, 1984, Walker drove Janet's Dodge Dart to a shopping center parking lot in Tulsa called Town West Shopping Center. He parked the car. He sat inside and watched people come out of a grocery store. He was looking for a victim. A woman named Valerie Shaw Hartzell came out of the grocery store. She was 25 years old. She worked as a radio news reporter for a station called KRAV. She had already done her grocery shopping for the week, but she had forgotten to buy diapers for her baby. So she had gone back to the store just to get diapers. She was alone. She walked to her pickup truck in the parking lot. She unlocked the door and opened it. At that moment, Walker came up behind her. He put a knife into her back. He warned her not to make a sound, or she would never see her baby again. He forced her into her own pickup truck and got in next to her. Walker made Valerie drive. They passed by 2 police cars parked nearby, but the officers did not see what was happening. Walker made Valerie go to 2 different banks. He tried to make her cash a check for $500 at the first bank, but the teller refused because it was above the drive-through limit. At the second bank, Valerie cashed a check for $650. Walker took the money. That night, it was raining hard. Walker made Valerie drive to a rural road near a town called Kellyville. They parked about 100 feet off the road. In the darkness and rain, Walker raped her and sodomized her. The next morning, May 25th, he made her lie in the back of the pickup truck. He raped her 2 more times. Valerie begged him to take her home to her children. He did not. Walker forced Valerie to drive to Claremore, Oklahoma. On May 25th, they arrived there. Walker heard that the police were searching for them. He knew he had to act fast. He cut strips from a towel to make a cord. He wrapped the cord around Valerie's throat. Before he pulled it tight, Valerie reminded him that she had 3 children. She begged him to think of them. Walker pulled the cord and strangled her until she died. Then he dumped her body in a rural area near Claremore in Rogers County, Oklahoma. Walker continued to drive Valerie's pickup truck. He went to bars and drank alcohol. On May 26th, he kidnapped another young woman. He held her for a couple of days. He raped her many times. But this woman was kind to him even after he hurt her. On May 27th, he drove her back to her own neighborhood, kissed her goodbye, and let her go free. She survived and called the police. On May 28th, Walker was in Van Buren, Arkansas. He broke into a mobile home. 2 women came home while he was inside. He pointed a gun at them. He forced them into their car. One woman said she was 5 months pregnant. Walker promised not to hurt them if they behaved. They stopped at a restaurant because everyone was hungry. Walker did not have money, so he pawned the gun. After they ate, he gave the women some money and dropped them off in Tulsa. They promised to give him a 1-hour head start before calling the police. They kept their promise. They did not call right away. On May 30th, Walker crashed through the front door of another home in Van Buren. 2 young girls were inside watching television. He had a knife. He forced them outside and into their car. He told the girl who was driving to find a deserted road because he wanted to have sex with both of them. When she stopped the car, the 2 girls broke loose and ran. A passing farmer helped them. Walker drove away in their car. That same day, Walker broke into another home. He held the people inside at gunpoint. He demanded the keys to their car. They gave him the keys. He drove away in their car. On May 28, 1984, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation made a breakthrough. Forensic experts had lifted fingerprints from the black Camaro that Walker abandoned. The Camaro belonged to Jane Hilburn, the woman Walker strangled in Veneta. The fingerprints were processed through a database. They matched a man named Gary Allen Walker. He had a long criminal record. The police now had a name. Police also showed photographs of Walker to the women who had survived his attacks. The 18-year-old woman from Oakhurst looked at the photos. She identified Walker as the man who pulled a knife on her and tried to rape her. The 17-year-old girl from Hominy also looked at the photos. She identified Walker as the man who kidnapped her and raped her at knife point. The 2 women who were held at gunpoint in the mobile home in Van Buren also identified Walker. The 2 young girls who escaped from the car in Van Buren also picked Walker out of a photo display. The victims all pointed to the same man. On June 2, 1984, police found Walker in Tulsa. He was in a rundown mobile home. He was sitting and drinking beer with 2 other men. The police moved in and arrested him without a fight. He was taken to police headquarters. After his arrest, Walker was interrogated by detectives. The first interrogation happened in the early morning hours of June 3rd. Police read him his rights. He said he did not want a lawyer. Then he began to talk. He confessed to kidnapping and killing Valerie Shaw Hartzell. He also said he would take the police to her body the next morning. On the morning of June 3rd, Walker was taken from the jail. He was read his rights again. He again said he did not want a lawyer. He then led police to the rural area near Claremore, where he had dumped Valerie's body. Rogers County authorities joined, because the body was in their county. Over the next 6 days, Walker continued to cooperate. He led investigators to other bodies. He showed them where he had thrown Janet Jewell's body into the creek near Beggs. He also told them about Margaret Bell Leidick. Her body was found in an abandoned barn beneath a haystack near Princeton, Kentucky. Walker had kept her body in her own Cadillac for nearly a week before hiding it. The police in Kentucky recovered her remains. Walker was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. He was also charged with rape and kidnapping. The murders had happened across 4 different counties in Oklahoma: Tulsa, Rogers, Craig, and Okmulgee. Each county wanted to prosecute him. The prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The first trial was for the murder of Eddie Cash. It took place in Tulsa County in November 1984. The jury was selected on November 7th. The trial began shortly after. Walker's lawyers presented an insanity defense. They showed evidence of his troubled childhood and his many mental hospital stays. A psychiatrist named Dr. Thomas Goodman testified for the defense. Dr. Goodman said that Walker probably knew right from wrong at the time of the killing. But he also said that Walker's mind was so distorted that he believed he was killing his stepfather, not Eddie Cash. Dr. Goodman said Walker did not believe killing his stepfather was wrong. The prosecution argued against the insanity defense. They pointed out that Walker methodically got Eddie's address from directory assistants. He went to the house. He knocked to make sure no one was home. When Eddie returned, Walker ran, found a brick, came back, and killed Eddie to silence him as a witness. The prosecution said these actions showed a clear mind that knew right from wrong. On November 13, 1984, the jury found Walker guilty of first-degree murder for killing Eddie Cash. The next day, the jury recommended the death penalty. On November 26th, the judge sentenced Walker to death. An execution date was set for February 6, 1985. But on December 6, 1984, a stay was granted while Walker's appeal was reviewed. The second trial was for the murder of Valerie Shaw Hartzell. It took place in Rogers County in May 1985. The jury found Walker guilty of both kidnapping and first-degree murder. They recommended the death penalty again. The judge sentenced him to death for the second time. For the murders of Janet Jewell and Jane Hilburn, Walker was convicted in separate trials. He received life in prison for both homicides. For the murder of Margaret Bell Leidick, Walker was tried in Kentucky in August 1986. He made a plea agreement with the prosecutors. They agreed not to seek the death penalty because Walker already had 2 death sentences from Oklahoma. Walker was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years for kidnapping and rape. In total, Walker received 2 death sentences, 6 life sentences, and 700 years in prison for all his crimes. Walker appealed his death sentences. On July 22, 1986, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed his first appeal for the murder of Eddie Cash. On December 1, 1986, the United States Supreme Court rejected another appeal. But on July 2, 1990, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Walker's death sentence and murder conviction for Valerie Shaw Hartzell. They ordered a new trial. In 1991, Walker pleaded guilty to killing Valerie Shaw Hartzell. He was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He avoided a second death sentence, but he still had the death sentence for killing Eddie Cash. Walker continued to fight that one remaining death sentence. He filed more appeals. On May 23, 1997, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals rejected another appeal. On February 22, 1999, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals turned down his appeal. On November 8, 1999, the United States Supreme Court denied his final appeal. He had no more legal options. On November 23, 1999, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals signed a death warrant. Walker's execution was scheduled for January 13th, 2000. Walker did not ask for clemency from the Pardon and Parole Board. He told reporters in his last interview that he was old and tired. He said he had a heart condition and had been hospitalized 4 times. He said if he was not executed, he would have only 5 years left to live anyway. On January 13th, 2000, Gary Allen Walker was put to death by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He was 46 years old. Before the drugs were given, he spoke to the families of his victims. He said, "I'm sorry for what I've done. I hope when I go the hate you have, and it's natural for you to hate me, that you would let it go with me." The drugs were administered. He was pronounced dead at 12:20 a.m. More than 30 family members of Walker's 5 murder victims gathered at the prison to watch. Some watched through a window in a room next to the execution chamber. Others watched on closed-circuit television in an overflow room. After Walker was pronounced dead, some of the family members clapped. Walker's last meal was 3 cheeseburgers with extra salt, 3 sliced tomatoes, French fries, and a strawberry malt. He received final visits from 2 sisters, a niece, and 2 cousins. The 5 women and 1 man that Walker killed were gone forever. Their families continued to live with the loss. But after 16.5 years of trials, appeals, and waiting, the legal process had reached its end. Gary Allen Walker was executed, and the story of his crimes was closed. Story 6. Steve Edward Roach was born on April 10, 1976. He grew up in Greene County, Virginia, near a small town called Stanardsville. His family lived in a rural area along U.S. Highway 33. Steve was one of 4 children in his home. However, his parents had more than 12 children between them from different relationships. The family was poor. They did not have a lot of money or resources. Steve's parents had a difficult marriage. During his childhood, they separated and then got back together 4 different times. Each time they separated, the family became unstable. When they got back together, things would seem normal for a while, but then the problems would start again. Steve's father, John Roach, had serious health problems. When Steve was 6 years old, his father was shot with a shotgun. The injury was severe. John Roach had to stay in the hospital for 6 months. While he was being treated for the gunshot wound, he received a blood transfusion. That transfusion gave him hepatitis C. The medication his father took for hepatitis C caused mood swings. Some days he would act normal. Other days he would become angry or sad for no clear reason. When Steve's mother left the house during the separations, his father began drinking alcohol heavily. John Roach also had many affairs with other women. He would bring these women home with him. Steve and his siblings were often at home when this happened. They saw things that young children should not see. There was little supervision in the home during those times. Steve's father also tried to kill himself at one point. Steve witnessed this attempt. This was a very frightening event for a young boy. When Steve was 14 years old, his parents made a decision. They asked the school to release Steve from compulsory education. This meant Steve stopped going to school. The reason his parents gave was that they needed Steve at home to do chores and to look after his younger brothers. So Steve left school in 1991. He never finished his basic education. He did not get a diploma or a GED at that time. Instead of going to school, Steve spent his days doing odd jobs. He helped neighbors with chores. He chopped wood for people. He cut grass. He also helped his relatives with cooking and cleaning. People in the community knew Steve as a helpful young man. One of the neighbors Steve helped was an elderly woman named Marion Hughes. She was 70 years old. She was a widow. She lived next door to Steve's family. Marion Hughes had worked at a restaurant before she retired. She was known as a sweet old lady. Her door was open to everyone. Steve would go to her house to help her with tasks. He also visited her just to keep her company. Sometimes they played a board game called Yahtzee together. Steve was also active in his church. He went to a Baptist church in the area. He volunteered his time to help paint the church and make repairs. He also worked at a camp for children in the George Washington National Forest. To people outside his home, Steve seemed like a good kid who helped others. But there were signs of trouble. In 1993, when Steve was 17 years old, he was convicted of 2 car thefts. The first car theft happened in May 1993. The second happened in August 1993. He was also convicted of reckless driving and failing to stop for a police officer during one of the car thefts. In June 1993, Steve broke into a house. He got in by breaking a window. Once inside, he ransacked the home. He stole a .357 Magnum pistol. He was convicted of breaking and entering and grand larceny for that burglary. In August 1993, a court put Steve on supervised probation and house arrest. His parents were supposed to supervise him at all times, but Steve violated the terms of his probation. He left the family home without permission. He also carried a weapon, which was not allowed. As part of his probation, a psychologist evaluated Steve. The psychologist recommended that Steve and his family go to counseling together. The psychologist also said Steve should try to get more education. Steve did start going to some counseling sessions with his family. He also enrolled in GED classes through an adult education program in Greene County. A forensic psychologist named Dr. Gary Hawk later evaluated Steve. Dr. Hawk found that Steve had average intelligence. He had mild depression, but he did not have a serious mental illness. Dr. Hawk also found that Steve was particularly immature for his age. He had poor impulse control. He could not control his emotions or his behavior as well as other teenagers his age should. Dr. Hawk believed this immaturity came from the lack of supervision and guidance in Steve's home. Dr. Hawk also noted that Steve had never committed any violent act before. There was no pattern of violent behavior in his life. The doctor said that adolescents in conflict often express strong angry emotions with very little reason. He said that if an adolescent is immature, that kind of reaction can be more extreme. Despite his crimes, many people in the community still thought Steve was a helpful person. His probation officer said Steve was trying to get his GED. His pastor said Steve volunteered at church. Neighbors said Steve did jobs for them without complaint. But the problems at home continued. Steve's parents were going through another difficult time. His father was blaming Steve for the problems in the marriage. Steve felt a lot of stress. He did not have a safe place to go or a stable adult to guide him. That was the state of Steve Roach's life in late 1993. He was 17 years old. He had dropped out of school. He had been in trouble with the law for stealing cars and burglary. He was on probation. His family was falling apart, and he lived next door to an elderly woman who had always been kind to him. On December 3, 1993, Steve Roach was 17 years old. He was living with his family next door to Marion Hughes. She was 70 years old. Steve knew her well. He had done chores for her. He had played Yahtzee with her. She was kind to him. Earlier that day, Steve knew something about Marion Hughes. He knew she had just received her Social Security check. He knew she kept cash in her purse. He also knew where she kept her purse inside her home. These were things he had learned from visiting her so often. Steve decided he wanted to take her money and her car. He did not plan to kill her. He later said his intent was only to rob her. But he brought a weapon with him. The weapon was a shotgun. It was a 12-gauge shotgun. Several weeks before December 3rd, Steve had been at a neighbor's house with 2 friends. They were firing that shotgun in the backyard. They used number 8-shot shells. A deputy sheriff had come to the neighbor's house at that time. The deputy took the shotgun to check if it was stolen. The deputy found that the gun belonged to Steve's father. so the deputy gave the shotgun back to the Roach family. On the evening of December 3rd, 1993, shortly after 9 p.m., Steve left his home. He carried the shotgun with him. He walked to Mary and Hughes's house. The distance was short. Her house was about 200 yards away from his home. He walked along the path he had taken many times before. When Steve arrived at Mary and Hughes's house, she was inside. She heard a knock at her front door. She got up and went to answer it. She opened the door. Marion Hughes was standing in the open doorway of her own home. She was looking at Steve Roach. She had no reason to be afraid. He was a neighbor boy she knew. He had helped her many times. She trusted him. Steve raised the shotgun. He pointed it at her. Then he fired one shot. The shotgun blast hit Marion Hughes in the chest. The wound was severe. The shot went through her chest wall and into her right lung. It also hit an artery. She died very quickly. She fell to the floor inside her doorway. Her body was found the next day, but she had died on the spot. Steve later said he did not know why he pulled the trigger. He said he could not explain what went through his mind. He said there was a lot of stress on him from his family problems. But he did not claim that anyone else was there. He acted alone. After he shot her, Steve stepped over her body. He walked into her home. He found her purse. Inside the purse there was about $60 in cash. There was also a Discover credit card. Steve took the purse with the money and the card. He also took the keys to her car. The car was a 1981 Buick Regal. It was parked at her home. Steve left Mary and Hughes's body lying in the doorway of her house. He did not call for help. He did not tell anyone what he had done. He got into her Buick and drove away. He drove south. He left Virginia. He crossed into North Carolina. Later that same night, he kept driving. He went further south into South Carolina. On December 4th, 1993, Steve tried to use Marion Hughes's Discover credit card at an automated teller machine. The ATM was in Lewisburg, North Carolina. He tried to withdraw cash from her account. He tried 4 times, but the card did not work. He was not able to get any money from the ATM. What Steve did not know was that the ATM had a video camera. The camera recorded his face while he tried to use the card. While Steve was driving the Buick, he left evidence inside the car. Marion Hughes's purse was still in the car. There was also a shotgun shell in the car. The shell was a number 8 load, the same type he had used to kill her. There was also a blue jacket and a plastic bag from a Winn-Dixie grocery store. Steve's palm print and fingerprints would later be found on that plastic bag and on the car itself. On December 5th, 1993, Steve was still driving the Buick in South Carolina. A highway patrolman named Trooper David F. Chavis saw the car. The car was speeding. It was going 69 miles per hour in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. The trooper turned on his patrol car lights. He pulled in behind the Buick to make a traffic stop. The driver of the Buick did not stop. Instead, the driver pulled the car over to the left shoulder of the road. Then the driver got out of the car. He ran into the woods beside the road. The trooper chased him, but the driver escaped into the trees. The trooper could not catch him. The trooper later described the driver's clothes. Those clothes matched the description of what Steve Roach had been wearing for the previous 2 days. The trooper impounded the Buick. He traced the car's ownership. It belonged to Marion Hughes. At that point, law enforcement officers in Virginia already knew that Marion Hughes was dead. Her body had been discovered on December 4th. So the police in South Carolina now knew that the Buick was connected to a homicide. While Steve was hiding in North Carolina and South Carolina, he made several telephone calls to his aunt. Her name was Annie Betty Dean. She asked him to come home and turn himself in. Steve did not come home right away. On December 6th, 1993, Steve finally called Sheriff William L. Morris of Greene County, Virginia. He said he would come to the sheriff's department. He said his father would bring him. Later that day, Steve arrived with his father. When Steve walked into the sheriff's department, he was not under arrest yet. He had come on his own. But the sheriff wanted to question him about the death of Mary and Hughes. Before any questioning began, Sheriff Morris read Steve his Miranda rights. Steve's father was present in the room. The sheriff explained that Steve did not have to say anything. He explained that anything he said could be used against him in court. He explained that he had the right to have a lawyer. Steve said he understood his rights. He signed a waiver form. His father also signed the form. Then Steve agreed to talk. At first, Steve lied to the sheriff. He told a story that involved another person. He said he went to Mary and Hughes's house with a friend named Scott Shiflett. He said they played Yahtzee with her. Then he said Shiflett took the car keys and the shotgun. He said Shiflett fired the gun through the roof to scare her. He said Shiflett took her purse and drove the car to North Carolina. The sheriff listened to this story. Then he told Steve that certain facts did not match. The sheriff explained the evidence that had already been discovered. He pointed out the problems with Steve's story. Another man in the room, Clarence Roberts, also spoke to Steve. Roberts told Steve that he knew Steve was lying. Roberts said that carrying a lie for the rest of his life would be a heavy burden. Then Steve changed his story. He stopped lying. He told the sheriff what really happened. Steve said, "I went over there and saw her counting the money, and as I was leaving, I had the shotgun laying at the door and I shot her, took the money, the car and left, went to North Carolina. And I tried to use the credit card about 4 times, but it wouldn't work." When the sheriff asked Steve where he shot Mary and Hughes, Steve answered, "In the chest." The sheriff recorded this confession on audio tape. Steve admitted that he alone had shot Mary and Hughes. He admitted that he took her purse and her car. He admitted that he tried to use her credit card. He did not claim that anyone else was involved. After giving this confession, Steve was arrested. After Steve Roach confessed to Sheriff William Morris on December 6, 1993, the police had both his words and physical evidence. The investigation continued to build a complete case. The police already had the videotape from the ATM machine in Lewisburg, North Carolina. That tape showed Steve's face as he tried to use Mary and Hughes's credit card on December 4, 1993. The tape was clear evidence that Steve had possession of the victim's card the day after the murder. The South Carolina Highway Patrol had impounded Mary and Hughes's Buick Regal after the driver ran into the woods on December 5th. Inside that car, police found the victim's purse. They also found a shotgun shell that matched the type used to kill her. They found a plastic grocery bag from a Winn-Dixie store. A fingerprint expert named Malin Jones lifted a palm print from that plastic bag. The palm print matched Steve Roach's left palm. Other fingerprints from the car also matched Steve's fingerprints. At the crime scene, forensic scientists examined the blood. Mary and Hughes had been shot in the chest. The wound had perforated an artery. The pattern of blood splatters showed that the person who fired the gun was standing within 5 feet of the victim. That meant the shooter was very close to the front door when he pulled the trigger. Scientists also tested Steve's clothes and hands after his arrest. They found no gunshot residue on his hands. They found no blood on his clothing except a very light stain on his shirt. The police also examined footprints at the scene of the crime. The shoes Steve was wearing on December 3rd did not match those footprints. These facts became part of the defense arguments at trial. Steve was charged with 3 crimes: capital murder, killing someone during a robbery while armed with a deadly weapon, use of a firearm in the commission of murder, and robbery. Because he was 17 at the time of the crime, a hearing was held to decide if he would be tried as an adult. The juvenile court found probable cause that Steve committed the crimes. The court told the Commonwealth's attorney that he could seek indictments against Steve before a grand jury. The circuit court then reviewed this decision and agreed. Steve would be tried as an adult. The trial took place in Greene County, Virginia. The courtroom was small. Many members of Mary and Hughes's family attended every day. The jury heard the evidence. They heard the audio-taped confession Steve gave to Sheriff Morris. They heard about the ATM videotape. They heard about the fingerprints and the shotgun shell. Steve's lawyers pointed out the lack of blood and gunshot residue on Steve. They also pointed out that his shoes did not match the footprints. But the jury found Steve Roach guilty on all 3 charges. He was convicted of capital murder, use of a firearm, and robbery. The trial then moved to the penalty phase. The jury had to decide whether Steve would receive life in prison or the death penalty. Virginia law at the time allowed the death penalty if the jury found that Steve would be dangerous to society in the future. This was called the future dangerousness predicate. The prosecution presented evidence of Steve's past crimes. He had been convicted of 2 auto thefts in 1993. He had been convicted of breaking and entering and stealing a .357 Magnum pistol from a home. He was on probation at the time of the murder. The prosecution argued that these crimes showed a pattern of lawbreaking that would continue if Steve was allowed to live in prison. The defense presented evidence to spare Steve's life. They called his mother, Shirley Roach, who testified about the family's struggles. They called his father, John Roach, who testified about his health problems, his drinking, and the lack of supervision in the home. They called Pastor Wendell Lamb, who said Steve had volunteered at church and at a children's camp. They called a forensic psychologist, Dr. Gary Lee Hawk, who testified that Steve was immature for his age, had poor impulse control, and had no history of violent behavior. Dr. Hawk said that Steve's act of killing came from displaced anger and emotional turmoil, not from a pattern of violence. Steve himself testified. He told the jury that he went to Mary and Hughes's house intending to rob her, not to kill her. He said he did not know why he pulled the trigger. He said he was sorry. He said, "I wish I could bring her back." The jury deliberated. They found that the future dangerousness factor was met. They fixed Steve's punishment at death. The trial court agreed with the jury's decision. In 1995, Steve Edward Roach was sentenced to death. He was also sentenced to 3 years for the firearm charge and life in prison for the robbery. But the death sentence was the main punishment. After the sentence, Steve was sent to death row. While there, he married a woman named Elisa Roach. He also began telling different stories about the crime. At one point, he claimed that another man was with him and that the other man fired the shot. His own lawyer called him a pathological liar. Later, Steve admitted that he had lied about that. He returned to the truth. He alone killed Mary and Hughes. Steve's lawyers filed appeals. They took the case to the Virginia Supreme Court. That court upheld the conviction and sentence in 1996. The case was cited as Roach v. Commonwealth for 68S.E.2D98, Virginia 1996. Then the lawyers filed appeals in state habeas corpus and federal courts. In 1999, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals also upheld the death sentence. Steve's lawyers argued that his parents were not properly notified of the hearing to transfer his case from juvenile court to adult court. The courts rejected this argument. In January 2000, the United States Supreme Court refused to hear Steve's case. That meant no more appeals. The execution date was set for January 13, 2000. Steve's lawyers asked Governor Jim Gilmore for clemency. They asked the governor to spare Steve's life. Several members of Mary and Hughes's family wrote letters to the governor, also asking for clemency. Amnesty International sent a letter. Pope John Paul II had previously asked for clemency in similar cases. But Governor Gilmore reviewed the case and decided not to intervene. 1 hour before the execution, he announced that Steve Roach would die. On January 13, 2000, Steve Roach was taken to the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was placed in a holding cell outside the death chamber. Earlier that day, he visited with his wife, his brother, and his father. He also met with his lawyer and his spiritual advisor, Pastor Wendell Lamb. Pastor Lamb had known Steve since Steve was 5 years old in Sunday school. At 8:55 p.m., Steve walked from the holding cell to the death chamber. He wore a light blue shirt and dark blue pants. He appeared calm. He had been given Valium to relax him. He walked to the stainless steel gurney. Guards strapped his hands, arms, and legs to the gurney. Pastor Lamb leaned down, patted Steve's cheek, and kissed him. Lamb said, "I love you." Steve said, "I love you." Lamb said, "See you on the other side." Steve said, "I'll see you there." As the medical team inserted intravenous tubes into his arms, Steve recited verses from Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The warden, David Garrity, gave a small nod. Behind a curtain, the medical team began the flow of chemicals. The first chemical put Steve to sleep. The second stopped his breathing. The third stopped his heart. A corrections official looked at the monitor. At 9:04 p.m., he announced, 9:04. Steve Edward Roach was pronounced dead. He was 23 years old. After the execution, Steve's lawyer released a statement on Steve's behalf. The statement said that Steve wanted to be remembered not just as a teenager who committed a horrible crime, but as an adult who accepted responsibility for it. The statement also said that Steve did not understand why society kills people to teach other people that killing is wrong. Steve Roach became the 604th person executed in the United States since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. He was the 75th person executed in Virginia since 1976. He was the 15th person executed in the United States for a murder committed when the killer was 16 or 17 years old. Marion Hughes remained dead. Her family continued to live with the loss of a 70-year-old woman who had been kind to everyone, including the boy who shot her in her own doorway. Steve Roach's widow was left without her husband, and the question of why a 17-year-old killed a woman who loved him was never fully answered. Story 7. Spencer Corey Goodman was born on October 28, 1968. He was adopted when he was 1 year old. His adoptive parents were Barnard Goodman Sr. and his wife. They lived in Texas. When Spencer was a child, his family tried to raise him well. His father, Barnard Goodman Sr., later said that the whole family loved Spencer when they took him in. His father also said that he tried very hard when Spencer was young to turn him around. But Spencer began to do things that broke the law. As Spencer grew older, he continued to make choices that got him into trouble with the police. His family became afraid of him. His adoptive father later testified in court that the immediate family feared Spencer. His father also said that Spencer had broken the heart of their family. Spencer did not finish his education in a normal way. He did not hold a steady job for a long time. Instead, he started committing crimes. On January 10, 1989, Spencer was convicted of burglary of a building in Harris County, Texas. Burglary means he broke into a building to steal things. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. On March 6, 1989, in Runnels County, Texas, Spencer was charged with unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. That means he took someone else's car without permission. The judge did not send him to prison right away. Instead, the judge gave him 7 years of deferred adjudication probation. This meant that if Spencer followed the rules and stayed out of trouble, he would not have a final conviction. But if he broke the rules, he could be sent to prison. Spencer did not follow the rules. On August 27, 1990, his probation was revoked. That means the judge took away the probation. Spencer was convicted of unauthorized use of a motor vehicle and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He did not serve all 5 years. He was released on parole in December 1990. Parole means he was allowed to leave prison early, but had to follow strict rules. One of the rules was that he had to report to a parole officer and live where the parole system told him to live. Soon after his release, Spencer broke the rules of his parole. Because of that, he was sent back to a parole violators facility in Behar County, Texas. This facility was run by a company called Wackenhut. It was a place for prisoners who had violated their parole. At that facility, Spencer was held until he could be given parole again. He was not a free man. He was waiting for a second chance. His family still tried to reach him. His adoptive father wrote him a letter. In the letter, the father said that the family could not turn Spencer around, and that Spencer continued to do things against the law, against God's laws, and against the laws of society. On July 1st, 1991, Spencer was granted parole again from the Wackenhut facility. He was given a bus ride back to Houston, Texas. He was dropped off on the east side of town at 9:30 in the morning. He was given papers telling him to report to a halfway house called Texas House by 5:30 that same evening. A halfway house is a place where parolees live under supervision to help them adjust back into society. Spencer did not go to the halfway house. He made a choice to walk away instead. Instead of going to the halfway house, Spencer started walking west. He walked for most of the night. He laid down for a while along the side of some railroad tracks. But mosquitoes kept biting him, so he could not sleep. The next day was Tuesday, July 2nd, 1991. Spencer kept walking. He walked out onto a road called Memorial Drive. During the middle of the afternoon, it started to rain. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Spencer walked into the parking lot of a Walgreens drugstore. He stayed in the parking lot for about 20 to 30 minutes. He was just hanging around. While he was there, he saw a white female drive up in a red 1991 Cadillac. The woman was Cecile Ham. She was 48 years old. She was about 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed about 130 pounds. She pulled her car into the fire lane on the blind side of the parking lot. Then she got out and went into the Walgreens store. She was not inside the store very long. When she came back out, she opened the driver's door and started to get into the car. At that moment, Spencer decided he wanted to take her car. He later explained that he had been walking for a long time and his feet hurt. He wanted transportation. Spencer ran up behind her while the driver's door was still open. Cecile was sitting behind the wheel. Spencer shoved her over with one hand. Then he punched her just under her left ear. He punched her to knock her out. She fell over to the passenger's side. She was knocked unconscious. Spencer got into the driver's seat. He thought that he may have hit her in the back of the neck to make sure she was unconscious. The keys to the car had been in her hand. They fell to the floor. Spencer picked them up and started the car. He looked around to see if anyone had seen what happened. It was still raining. There was nobody else in the parking lot. Spencer pulled out of the parking lot and turned right onto Memorial Drive going west. But there was a subdivision down that way, so he turned around. He drove to a road called Derry Ashford for a ways. Then he turned off toward the west. He was near a high school off of Derry Ashford. He pulled off the main road and parked on a side road behind a small building. Then he used martial arts and broke Cecile Ham's neck. He later said he did not know why he did it. He said he was lost. He felt for her pulse and knew she was dead. Spencer put her body in the trunk of the car. He was not wearing a shirt because his shirt was wet from the rain. He was wearing jogging pants. After putting her in the trunk, Spencer drove down the road. He was right by the high school when he saw a man in a truck. Spencer asked the man how to get to Interstate 10. The man gave him directions, and Spencer followed them. As he drove, Spencer went through Cecile's purse. He took out her wallet. He found about $20 and some change. He also found some credit cards. He stopped at an Exxon gas station at the intersection of Highway 6 and Westheimer. He filled up the car with gas. He used Cecile's Exxon gas card to pay. He signed her name on the card. Then he got onto Interstate 10 and headed west. Over the next several weeks, Spencer used Cecile's credit cards many times. He left behind a trail of nearly 60 credit card transactions. One of those transactions was captured on a surveillance videotape. He used the cards to buy things like beer and cigarettes. He also gave away some of the presents that Cecile had bought that day. He drove to Colorado. On August 7, 1991, a deputy sheriff in Eagle County, Colorado, spotted Spencer driving Cecile's red Cadillac. The deputy tried to stop him. Spencer did not stop. Instead, he drove away at high speed through the Colorado mountains. The chase lasted for 32 miles. At the end of the chase, Spencer drove the Cadillac over a low cliff. The car was wrecked. Spencer then surrendered to the deputy. After he was arrested, Spencer gave a written statement to the police. He explained everything he had done, from walking away from the halfway house to punching Cecile, breaking her neck, putting her in the trunk, using her credit cards, and driving to Colorado. On August 8, 1991, Spencer was returned to Texas. He then led law enforcement officers to the place where he had left Cecile's body. He had dumped her remains in an open field near a town called Uvalde, Texas. The officers found the body. On August 9, 1991, at a Houston police station, Spencer gave a videotaped statement. He said the same things he had written in his first statement. The videotape showed that he was an adult male, about 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, healthy and strong. After Spencer gave his videotaped confession on August 9, 1991, the police had all the information they needed. They had his written statement, his videotaped statement, and the location of Cecile Ham's body. They also had the credit card receipts and the surveillance video from the gas station. These were the clues that solved the case. On January 13, 1992, a grand jury in Fort Bend County, Texas, indicted Spencer for capital murder. The charge was that he intentionally killed Cecile Ham while committing a robbery or a kidnapping. Under Texas law, that is a capital offense, which means the punishment could be death. The trial began a few months later. The prosecutors showed the jury all the evidence. They showed Spencer's confession where he said he punched Cecile, broke her neck with martial arts, and put her body in the trunk. They showed the credit card receipts and the video. They also showed that Spencer was 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, while Cecile was only 5 feet 3 inches and 130 pounds. That showed he was much stronger than she was. Spencer decided to testify in his own defense. He admitted that he struck Cecile in the head and neck with his fist to steal her car, but he denied breaking her neck. He also denied that he intended to cause her death. He said he only wanted to knock her out and take the car. The prosecutors did not believe him. They pointed to his confession, where he clearly said he broke her neck. They also pointed out that he felt for her pulse and knew she was dead before he put her in the trunk. Then he drove away, used her credit cards, and went to Colorado. The jury listened to all the testimony. On May 26, 1992, they found Spencer guilty of capital murder. The same jury then had to decide his punishment. Under Texas law at that time, the jury had to answer 2 special questions. First, did Spencer pose a future danger to society? Second, did he act deliberately and with the expectation that he would kill? If the jury answered yes to both questions, the judge would sentence him to death. The prosecutors brought witnesses to show that Spencer was dangerous. One police officer testified that Spencer had the psychological profile of a cold-blooded murderer. A sociologist testified that Spencer would be a risk for future criminal violence. 2 other men testified that Spencer had been a gang member in prison and had threatened one of their lives. Spencer's own adoptive father, Barnard Goodman Sr., testified. He said that the family feared Spencer. He told the jury that the family loved Spencer when he was young, but they could not turn him around. He put the decision of life in prison or death in the jury's hands. The jury took only 3 hours to decide. They answered yes to both special questions. On June 1st, 1992, the trial judge sentenced Spencer to death. After the sentence was read, Cecile's husband, Bill Ham, and her mother, Luella Autry, released a written statement. They said that the goodness that was Cecile would never touch their lives again. They thanked the police and the prosecutors. They said the community should work for a system that considers the rights of victims to be of supreme importance. Spencer's case was automatically appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On April 10, 1996, that court affirmed his conviction and death sentence. Spencer did not ask the United States Supreme Court to review the case. Over the next several years, Spencer filed multiple requests for habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a legal way for a prisoner to challenge his detention. He filed a state writ in April 1997. The court denied it in October 1997. He then filed a federal habeas petition in November 1997, but he dismissed it himself in May 1998. He filed a second state writ in June 1998, but the court dismissed it as an abuse of the process. He filed a second federal habeas petition in July 1998. On February 22, 1999, the federal district court dismissed it as too late. The United States Court of Appeals denied him permission to appeal on September 16, 1999. He then filed a petition with the United States Supreme Court, but the court did not stop the execution. The execution date was set for January 18, 2000. On that day, Spencer was taken to the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was 31 years old. He was strapped to a gurney. He gave a final statement. He expressed love for his family and a woman named Cammie. He thanked the chaplain. Then he said, "That's it, Warden." The lethal injection was started. Spencer gulped 3 times. He sputtered loudly about half a dozen times. Then he fell unconscious. He was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m., 9 minutes after the flow of lethal drugs began. Cecile Ham's husband, Bill Ham, was present as a witness. A reporter asked him how he was doing. He replied, "Great." Cecile's brother was also there. After the execution, Spencer's niece, Megan Goodman, later wrote that her uncle was not a monster. She said he was the most loving person she had ever known. But the court had made its final decision. Spencer Corey Goodman was executed by lethal injection on January 18, 2000, and the case of Cecile Ham was closed forever.